Welcome to Enjoy the Journey podcast, where we interview expert entrepreneurs and thought leaders to help guide you in pursuit of financial freedom. Presented to you by Jackson Milan, the Wealth Mentor, where we help service-based business owners remove cash flow bottlenecks, maximize their profits, and turn business profits into personal wealth. G'day guys, Jackson Milan, the Wealth Mentor here, and we're here for another episode of the Enjoy the Journey podcast. And I've got a very special guest today, James Rendell from Co-Pilot Marketing. And James was introduced through the Black Belt community, through Taki Moore, and has really kind of filled a little bit of a void that we've had in the podcast of guests that we've had on the show. I'm really excited to do a little bit of a deep dive with James, because I think this is a big opportunity for many small business owners, not only just in Australia, but around the world, to really kind of level up their marketing competencies, to make sure they can attract more of their ideal clients without constantly having to hand the reins over to sometimes expensive agencies that just treat you like another number. So James has got a phenomenal business and I'm looking forward to sharing some of his genius with you today. So James, thanks for joining us, mate. How's things with you?
Things are great, Jackson. I'm really excited to be here. I know I've really enjoyed being, part of the Black Belt community and seeing all the fantastic stuff that you and your community do, and really honoured to be here and to hopefully share some insights that your community can take away from our discussion.
Mate, I'm really looking forward to it. So, James, give us a little bit of background, mate. What's Co-Pilot Marketing, and tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah, so I started Co-Pilot Marketing, let me zoom out here, in 2015. And the promise piece has always been do it with you rather than do it for you. My background's always been in marketing and management, in the consulting space and working for various service-based and product-based businesses. So my passion has always been helping other people reach their full potential. And when I started a consulting practice, I really didn't like the idea of putting a set of handcuffs on people and really, holding secrets and all of that cliche sort of language around doing it for you. I lecture in marketing and that's been a bit of my background in addition to the coaching and consulting. So I've always found it really natural to work inside a business and help sort of be the conduit between the business owner, the founder or a CEO and their often more junior sort of internal team, where I can impart some wisdom, some frameworks, some resources, and really help people be the best version of their own self in a marketing context. And, not like we spoke about before the call, not having people feel like they've got to go and spend a ton of money to outsource to an agency. And as soon as you sort of turn the tap off, all the leads stop and all of that momentum dries up. So really that's my passion piece in helping people, in a way, make myself redundant and allow them to build scalable marketing plans.
Fantastic, mate. This is music to my ears. And it's always something that has really frustrated me, that there's this massive void in the marketplace where I think many business owners feel like if you want to get a good marketing resource, somebody who isn't just like a marketing graduate and learned kind of big business corporate marketing, which is very different than what small businesses should be doing. You need to pay kind of top dollar to have somebody on the books full time. Or on the flip side, you've got agencies that sometimes just treat you like another number and sometimes overpromise and under-deliver. So there's kind of a big void here. And I think we're going to kill some sacred cows here today, mates, because I think there's a hard conversation that we need to have and really give some small business owners some really important advice. So James, you've seen, I'm sure, a lot of service businesses over the years. What do you feel are the biggest faux pas and mistakes that service businesses make when it comes to marketing?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think a lot of times businesses put tactics before strategy. And it's a really easy trap to fall into when we see other businesses performing certain tactics, whether it's starting a Facebook group or a podcast or doing something else. And in their mind, they've just got to emulate what really successful businesses are doing rather than starting with a strategy. And the key for any business is you've got to put the foundations in place to make sure that any marketing effort that you do is not only right for you, but it's got to be right for your target audience. And a lot of times when we sit down and work with businesses, we've got to strip away a lot of the things that they've been trying to do that haven't had any traction because they haven't got their promise piece right. They're not living in that zone of genius and living their value proposition. They're having a piecemeal approach. They're starting things. And what tends to happen when you don't know what you don't know, you tend to repeat the same sorts of mistakes. They're just dressed up differently. And I think it's really hard, as we said, if a company doesn't have that internal marketing expertise, then really they don't know where to start. So they feel like we'll just try something, or we've seen something in the marketplace, we'll try and copy that in some shape or form. And naturally it falls flat. And I'm hoping that for any of the listeners today that feel like that speaks to them on some body, they've tried things and it ultimately hasn't worked, I'm really hoping that we can give people some guide work, some frameworks and systems that they can then use to unpack what's not working, but how do we actually correct it?
This is really interesting, right? Like we speak to a lot of small business owners and they say, oh, yeah, I'm going to try some Facebook ads this month.
Mm.
And marketing, when you treat it tactically, you don't just say, I'm going to try things this month. Like everything should be forward facing and it's a cog in the bigger wheel of what actually you're trying to achieve from a marketing standpoint. And what I really love what you said, James, is that businesses need to have this foundation in place. So let's talk about some of these pillars of the foundation. And I see a lot of business owners getting this wrong. So what are the non-negotiables when it comes to setting a good marketing foundation in your service business?
Brilliant. What I might do, Jackson, and I know some people are going to be listening to the audio version of this, I'm going to switch gears. I've got something up on screen here and I'll try and talk through it as descriptively as I can for those that don't have the visual. But I'm going to swing this around because I think for a lot of people, we've got to start to give them a tool that they can use. So really what I find as a starting point, and I think the best way to address that question is a lot of businesses come to us and want to work with us because they haven't got the clarity on what to do. And we've got sort of three pillars up here on the screen at the moment. The first is obviously clarity. You know, we don't know what we should be doing. We don't know what's right for us. And we obviously haven't been able to get a lot of success in what we've done in the past. The next typical gap is then the structure. Once people find they know what to do, the next piece is how do I actually do it? You know, from a resourcing perspective, what does my software need to look like? What does the team structure need to look like? What foundational pieces do I need to have in place so I can actually then set my marketing up to help me grow the business? You know, we don't want a revolving door. We don't want to find that as soon as we stop doing some form of paid activity, things dry up. We need to make sure that we've got a repeatable effort so that once we've nailed one component, we're then moving on to the next and then we've got scale. So that's typically the challenge that that we find is businesses don't either have one of those three components, or in a lot of cases, they don't have any of those three. So we make sure that we unpack all of those 9 foundational elements that we have in our models so that people have a system, a set of interrelated frameworks that they can use to make sure whatever they do sets them up for scale. So as we can see here, really expand upon that clarity, structure, and growth component and make sure that we've got a set of interrelated tools that people can use. So the first piece that I tend to find businesses jump straight into when they're trying to do marketing themselves is they go straight into content. Pillar here is content strategy. So businesses typically find I need to write a newsletter. An email newsletter is a pretty traditional use case, or write a blog or start a podcast or do something, right? So they jump straight into the doing without actually having a mechanism to make sure the content they produce actually solves the problems of that ideal fit client. So the content strategy is where people normally start. And I think the best red flag is if you're generating content and it's not either generating leads or it's not resonating with that audience, any of those KPIs you have in place are falling flat, that's a really good use case that you don't have those preceding sort of five foundations in. And we'll be able to unpack this as we go through. I
think the interesting part there, James, is that the agencies of the world have conditioned business owners to be like, oh no, it's just about building engagement. And that's just a cop out of saying that your content's shit, right?
Yeah.
Engagement doesn't matter. If it doesn't generate leads, it's not working.
Correct. And I think, and SEO is probably a really big one with this, is a lot of agencies, as you said before, they're promising the world, but really what they're delivering is the equivalent of a handful of sand. They'll show people a lot of vanity metrics. Look, we're ranking number 1 for a particular obscure term that doesn't really drive any search traffic. Or we find all you've got to do is keep committing to the content. It's like planting an oak tree. Don't worry, it's all really foundational now, but in 2, 3, 4, 5 years, you're going to have, acorns dropping everywhere and everyone's going to be super happy, right? But all they're doing is buying themselves 2 years before they've got to think of the next promise piece. And it's hard for business owners. You put so much confidence and faith into people that you outsource things to, but marketing has become a terrible space. Well, I think we're the 2020 version of new car salesmen and all of those icky, sales and marketing tactics that people have learnt to hate. And it makes it really hard to know what to do when you don't know who to trust. When often it's great salespeople that are terrible marketers, and it's a really challenging place to be in. So the content strategy, it's crucially important, but it's got to come after we put those foundations in place. So I normally like sketching it out this way. And what I might do just for the benefit of being able to read this, we'll zoom in a little bit into this model. So we've got content strategy as that 6th pillar, but there's a lot that needs to come first. The other place that people otherwise start is lead generation, which is the 7th component. And really the difference between the content strategy is it's basically running ads. I'm going to sponsor some form of event, at 10 trade shows. I'm going to run Facebook ads, LinkedIn ads, Google ads. Doesn't matter what it is. Often what people are trying to do here is shortcut the process and throw money at a problem, which sometimes can mask the underlying issue, because you may have some level of traction, but it's as much guesswork and luck as it is something else. And what we need to make sure, again, is we don't just start putting all your marketing budget into running ads and then find that it's completely evaporated before you've had a chance to allow that to give you some momentum and inertia. So they're really the two key components that must exist, but not before we put everything else in place.
These are the tactics that people fall into. Producing too much content and being so tactical there, and then running ads and then falling short. So in what order should we go about this, James? What's the appropriate way for us to go about this to make sure we've got the right foundation, but we've got the right building blocks in place that really precede us diving into producing the content and running things like ads and doing lead gen activity?
Yeah. So why don't we start from the start? Let's keep building it out, and let me know if there's any questions as we go. So the first piece really is targets and budgets. Now, I apologize for the terrible handwriting for anyone trying to read this without audio. I've got a much tidier version we'll zoom into in a moment's time. But it's targets, you have to start with targets and budgets, right? Otherwise, if you don't know what you're aiming for, then you're always on target. We're always heading in the right direction. But before we start any form of marketing, really at a high level, we need to know, well, how many new clients do I need to generate? And how much retained revenue do I need in the business? I know this will speak very specifically into the work that you do. You've got lots of dashboards and benchmarking tools for businesses to know what's my cost per lead, or what's my cost per acquisition, what's my customer lifetime value. If we're not measuring these tactics, then marketing's an expense. And I think the attitude shift has to be marketing is an investment. We're buying future revenue in the business. And I think that's really where we start, is make sure people have the strong foundational financial mindset with this. Is I'm walking up to a vending machine, and this is sort of the attitude. How much money am I putting in to pull a customer out? And we need to make sure all of the tactics and efforts that we develop is about building that vending machine, so we know what we're buying.
And this is so critical, James, because I think it all comes down to that foundation of knowing your numbers, because it's that ultimate question of how much are you prepared to spend to secure a client? And if we can understand how much we can afford to spend, how much we can afford to more so invest to win that client, then we can predictably measure, okay, are we on track for that? Or what's the benchmark that let's say we say, I can afford to spend $1,000 to secure a client, and we're getting them at 1,200. Well, okay, is that going to be the be all and end all? Or would we just prefer to have it at 1,000? If we spend 1,200, that's still okay. Whereas many business owners just say, I can only afford to spend this much this month. And as a result, they end up limiting their growth. So it's a big shift in mindset, but they need to have that clarity first in order to see the bigger picture, right?
Absolutely. And I think for a lot of businesses, they have an idealistic view that we just want to be able to improve things. But the real power in knowing your numbers is you get the cumulative impact in the outputs. Total sales revenue, that's an output of a whole range of smaller little sort of micro objectives. So if we know how to improve like conversion rates on landing pages, or average dollar sale to a customer, or customer lifetime value, and we keep inching up these numbers, we've got a few models we show clients where 10% improvement in 3 or 4 key areas can give you 73% improvement at the back end. So if we sit down and we think, well, what's the profitability of my business look like if I can spend the same amount in marketing, but I end up getting a revenue increase by 73% without adjusting really any of the fixed costs in the business, then your profit starts to skyrocket. And that's sort of why we've modeled it this way, why it sits in that intersection of growth is once we've got this system in place, it's about year 2 repeating onto year 1 and year 3 repeating onto year 2, and we start to get that sense of scale. So it's not just about setting targets and budgets for now, it's about giving you a really strong benchmarking tool. So the next campaign or the next marketing plan period, we've got something we can get so laser focused into. And you use the exact right term, it's predictability, the capacity of knowing what's going to happen into the future. So again, that's why I start with marketing not being guesswork. It's about having, and that's why we use the term, it's a marketing compass. The quickest path from where you are now to where you want to go without getting pulled off course.
Love it. Awesome. So now, assuming we've got the targets and the budgets, what's next?
The next piece is to align your sales and marketing. So I'm just going to use the S+M component and aligning the sales and marketing effort. And when I mention this, the first place people go into in their mind is making sure the sales team aren't fighting with the marketing team. Because in bigger companies, and I'm sure everyone here that's sort of grown into having 2 separate departments, there can be friction between the sales function and the marketing function for, a whole range of cliche obvious reasons. But this is much, much deeper than just getting, Stephen and Michelle to like each other. This is really about knowing what's the handover piece between the marketing function and then the sales function. So some of those targets and budgets, and this is where it sort of bleeds from one of these steps into the next, is knowing what we call a sales qualified lead. what determines a good fit lead, and not just someone who meets the, that prospect fit criteria, but those that exhibit the right behaviors and traits to show that sales outreach is now appropriate. And ideally we get people to raise their hand and opt into a sales discussion with you, but we want to make sure we get that timing right. You move too soon, you can burn an opportunity. You move too late, that person's moved on. So we need to make sure that we've got all the systems in place so that there's a joint level of responsibility. Marketing knows how many leads they've got to generate each month. The sales team know what they've got to close to then hit the targets that we set in that first step. Does the salespeople have to contribute insights? So the marketing content's, keeping up to date with changing trends in the marketplace. The marketing team have to produce more content specifically for the sales process. So we're going to get really, really particular about those joint responsibilities so that we're going on this journey together. It's not sales and marketing, it's effectively one unified team to generate revenue for the business. So again, ultra foundational, but every business that I see that gets this right are those that start with really knowing their numbers and having a really aligned sales and marketing function.
And it's about that feedback loop as well, James, right? Because this isn't going to be perfect straight out of the gate. It's about just having that iterative process where at the end of the day, if the sales team are getting the leads, they need to say, hey, actually, this isn't quite the right client, or they're coming too early, or they're too far gone. So it's a matter of finding that balance.
Definitely. And one thing we get our clients to do in this stage is build what we call a sales and marketing service level agreement. And it can feel really academic. It can feel really, unnecessarily heavy. But it's not so much about having a 50-page document that sits in everyone's desk drawers. It's just about having a really clear understanding about how do we work together and make sure, as you said, it's version 1.1, not version forever. So when we set this down, it's largely going to be anecdotal and around the foundational pieces we think from a best intent is going to take us where we want to go. But it's about constantly, looping back to this. What's working? What's not? But unless we start with that foundation, then everything's always going to be hypothetical.
Makes perfect sense.
So we've got our targets and budgets set. We all know what we're aiming for. Sales and marketing functions really well aligned so we don't miss out on any opportunities. The next piece is drilling into what we call our buyer persona. And lots of different people use different terminology for this, perfect fit client, target audience. Doesn't really matter what you call it. It's about having an ultra clear understanding of who are we serving for. And I think every business sometimes gets blinded and they think the opposite way around. What do we sell in terms of the products or services at a very heavy mechanical level? And who could this be a fit for? And we have this scattergun approach in terms of, well, as long as any business is good business, which is just the absolute wrong way of thinking about it on so many levels. But we got to really nail down who is that perfect fit client. Not just demographics, not just high level ideological stuff, like ultra clear where I could sit down and explain to you at a very specific level, we solve for this person that has these quantifiable requirements.
And this is something like so many businesses get this wrong, because I think what I've found in my experience, James, is that for many people, there's a fear here of missed opportunity. I niche down or I get really specific on who my ideal avatar is. And then there's all of this business opportunity that's just going to end up passing by because I don't speak to them.
Yeah.
But the opposite is true, right? Like for every example that I've seen that businesses have niched and been really specific on who they help and how they help them, it only benefits them. What about in your experience, mate? Because you've probably got a lot more experience than this than me. What's been your experience of people who niche and get really good at this kind of buyer persona?
Yeah, the exact same thing happens, as you said. They get concerned that they'll miss opportunity and I'm narrowing down the audience, which means I'm narrowing down my profitability or the revenue that I can attract. When, as you said, the exact opposite's true. And what I say to people is, in trying to appeal to everyone, you end up appealing to no one. And the objective of our marketing is on a scale, like one to many, it needs to feel like you're speaking specifically to me. Any buying decision that we've ever made as consumers, and I'll say the best way to try and, unpack whether this is the right thing for you is to think of your own experience as a consumer. Like we're all great marketers in the reverse, where everyone's an active buyer. We know how to make good buying decisions. When we think about it, if we're going to, and particularly service-based businesses that are selling informational products or professional services, we want to deal with an expert. And I say to people, the great analogy is, do you want to be a Mr. Fix-It, a jack of all trades where someone might hire you to mow their lawn, fix the leaky tap, put up a fence, hop up and clean the gutters of the roof. We don't value things that we see as a commoditized service. But if you want to get a stonemason to come and build a feature wall for your brand new $3, $4, $5 million home, you're going to fly someone in from Italy that's worked with this particular type of granite. Price is never the equation. And we don't even think to haggle on price. It's this person who's constantly booked out because they're the expert. And I say, we need to be the stonemason in what we do. Narrow down the tools that we use, get ultra specific in how you sort of, use your craft to deliver value to people. And then that way you're not then flying from one job to another and you've got all of these expensive tools, some of which you never use. It just means you're running around like a chicken with their head cut off because you're just so busy, but you're not really making any progress.
And this has been an iterative process. Like even we've been on our own journey with this, James, and like we went from being a traditional financial planning business where we kind of helped everyone, and then we went to kind of business owners and busy professionals, which is still like it's getting there, but it's still vague. And then now we only work with service-based business owners and help them increase their profits and build personal wealth. So it's always a journey. So for anybody who's listening, James, what's the kind of the minimum viable niche that businesses need to have for this to work?
Yeah, great question. So what I might do, you happy, Jackson? Let's circle back because I've got two models at the end that I want to come back to show people how to pick their ideal fit client.
Beautiful.
I think it might work better once we've rounded off the next couple of foundations.
Let's do that, mate.
So we've talked buy personas. Really, the next level here is a buying process map. And really what we mean by this is understanding the process that your ideal fit client goes through when they make the buying decisions for the products and services that you sell. And every buying decision that anyone makes goes through three distinct processes. It doesn't matter whether you're choosing a financial advisor or where to go for dinner or buying a new car. Everything that we do goes through a learning stage. At the beginning, all we have is symptoms. Like we know there's this challenge that's happening, but I don't know how to solve it yet. And then as we move our way through, we're clearer on what the problem is, but there's a myriad of different ways that we can solve that problem. So we consider, do I do it myself? Do I outsource this to someone else? Do I use software? Like, how do I actually go about solving this problem? And then when we know how we want to solve it, let's say we're going to use an agency, then it's who's the right fit for us. So everyone goes through that sort of considered decision-making process. The goal of our marketing is to move people through that process by keeping them in our own world, but giving them the content that they need when they need it. So we're not moving too quick. And again, like we said, with that sales and marketing alignment, we're not hitting people with sales-oriented content when in their mind, they don't even know what their problem is yet. And we move too fast. The goal of the buying process map is knowing what content is going to best serve people at that point in time and having the mechanism so they can move as quick as they want through that content.
Makes perfect sense. So what are some examples, James? Let's pick an example of maybe an industry where we're kind of taking them through some various stages of that buying cycle. What would be some examples of what we could do to guide a prospect from kind of coming into our world all the way through to becoming a client?
Yep. So let's say we're starting at the awareness stage, which is the very beginning of someone's buying process map. So they're aware of an underlying problem. They've got the symptoms that they may be experiencing. So at that point, what they're really trying to do is diagnose the problem. So the job of our marketing there, and it doesn't matter what professional services space that we're in, maybe would you like to pick one, and we can ground to that something that might be familiar to a lot of your audience. What's a good professional services business?
Yeah, let's say an accountant.
Excellent. So let's say and I'll write it up here. As it stands right now, I'm doing all of the accounting functions in my own business myself. So there's going to be some trigger events which make it clear to me that something's got to change in my business. So it may be, and I might pose this as a question, do you typically find that when people transition from doing all their bookkeeping or statutory lodgements themselves and then moving to having an accountant, are there underlying symptoms that are pretty common whereby people are, missing cash flow, or they're finding they're missing reporting and getting fines? Like, are there typical triggers that you see?
There's normally probably two things. It's taking too much time and they want their time to be spent elsewhere in the business of things they actually enjoy, because most people don't enjoy accounting and bookkeeping. And two, they feel like they might be missing out on opportunities because of their limited knowledge in the area.
So what the job of our marketing is, and the buying process map and the buyer persona development really has to come through extensive research that we do by interviewing our customers, interviewing our internal team to finding out what do they see as some of those underlying challenges, frustrations, and pain points people have, and then getting really clear as to, well, what were some of those early trigger events? So as you said, it may be that it's just taking too much time. So the content that we need to produce at that awareness stage speaks to those frustrations and fears. And so normally what we see is everyone's got a goal they want to work to or a challenge they want to move away from. And embedded within those are fears and frustrations. So the fear here may be, I'm missing out on the opportunity to grow my business because I'm bogged down doing things that I'm not expert in. So again, we use their language to be able to position the challenge in a way that's very understandable for this position that they're at. So we might have a blog post, the 7 reasons why business owners typically don't grow their business because they're bogged down in, the accounting, or, obviously we tighten up the language, but we speak specifically to the questions and emotions and thoughts that they have. Are you meeting your statutory lodgement obligations? Is your business compliant? All of the things that typically might be bubbling around in their mind that they know is a problem, but they're not quite sure whether they're fitting in that space.
This makes perfect sense to us, James. Like, this is something that we went through ourselves in our business, because we found that the biggest fear for many people when it comes to their finances is that they just don't know what they don't know. So we put together a scorecard, which has the top 40 things that business owners need to be doing to get on the right track for financial freedom. And it was a way of taking them from kind of being completely unaware to being problem aware, and then ultimately us being the logical solution that they end up going with, right?
That's the awareness piece. And as you said, it's a lot of people go through the different journey. It's about knowing at the end of the day, who are the people that's your perfect fit client? They will all have similarities in that process. So we want to unpack that as specifically as we can. Because once the buyers move through that point of awareness, which may be, right, I now need to outsource, a financial function in the business. That might be as specific as it sets right now. So we're saying outsourcing financial functions. The next piece is the consideration. So in their mind, they've got a whole range of things that they can do. I might then decide to get a virtual CFO, or I might completely and utterly use a bookkeeping function. Or do I need an accountant that can do a broad spectrum of things? Do I hire a senior, accounting person to work internally in the business? And often the trap that business owners fall into is they think that all roads must lead to them. And the job of our marketing, and I think it's a really hard thing for sometimes people to be comfortable with, is the job of your marketing isn't to turn bad fit leads into good fit leads. It's to strip away the bad fit leads so you're only working with the good fit leads.
Makes sense.
So your content to this point shouldn't be sales oriented. It shouldn't be about, smoke and mirrors and trickery and trying to convince people that, don't worry, if you're not a good fit, then maybe we can turn you into one. It's about producing content that is genuinely helpful, and it makes the ideal fit client recognize that this person is a subject matter expert, and I want to keep learning from them because they haven't been selling to me. They've just been genuinely helpful. So that's the consideration piece. We've got to get really, really clear about all the options available to someone so that we can then make sure the right fit client sees that we've been helpful in allowing them to diagnose that next step. Then we move through into a decision stage. And really what this is about now is switching gears. Once someone's at the stage where they've identified, I need to outsource, my accounting functions to a full service accounting firm, now we can start speaking about ourselves. So we're changing gears. Now, people often think when they hear about this approach of content marketing that I can never sell. I can never position my business. I can never demonstrate our capability. You absolutely can. It's just about doing it when the time's right. So when we know someone's at that decision stage, we can talk through case studies, various forms of social proof. If I'm a software firm, it's free demos or some form of trial period. Maybe it's a free consultation like a lot of, professional services firms use. That's all completely acceptable, and it's very, very effective once we've demonstrated, subject matter expertise and we've been able to build a relationship. And that's the most important piece of the buying process map. Is a lot of companies try and hit everyone right when they're at that decision stage. We're going to run Google ads, which are notoriously very expensive for buying, trigger events, because everyone tries to shortcut the process. Where when it's noisy down there, we want to be able to cut through all that noise because we started at the beginning. We help people quantify their problem. We've had them using the language of our models, our systems, our processes, because they've downloaded our ebooks, they've attended our webinars. So what we do when we take, all of our clients through this process is we show them what content is a good fit for the right stage. So as a really, quick example, ebooks are fantastic awareness content. Webinars are really strong consideration content, and case studies and consultations are fantastic decision content pieces. Because we can then make sure we're positioning ourselves as a subject matter expert, but we don't have to do it in a way that talks about our services. We're just helping people move their way through the process.
Beautiful. And I see so many businesses getting these resources, these tactics in the wrong place. And if you get them in the wrong place, they're not effective because they're not serving the role that they're supposed to serve in this process. So it makes perfect sense, mate. So thanks for explaining.
So the gap here, and this is probably the one area that I see most businesses skipping over, is your value proposition. And really the clearest way that I can explain this is it's your promise to your ideal fit client about the value that you deliver to them. It's probably, we can arrive at that conclusion just by the term, But it's not just about defining the value proposition, it's about living it in everything that we do. And depending how we go for time, I've got another model where we can really unpack what this looks like. But the goal of our marketing is to make sure that, again, we're speaking specifically to that person, but in a way that really resonates with them, that makes them feel like this person is for me. And I think another trigger, if someone thinks they have their value proposition nailed, is if you're not generating enough demand, then it probably means you're not speaking specifically enough to those people. As you said before, in trying to appeal to everyone, we end up appealing to no one, and niching down is really fearful. The job of our value proposition is to very clearly demonstrate through all forms of our messaging exactly who we're for. So it's about unpacking your superpowers and making sure we then repackage them in a way that shows people, I can take you where you want to go. And all of this stuff's really a fluid extension of that buyer persona piece. Once we know who we're selling for, then it's about appealing to them. And I say to people, often the great question to ask yourself is, now that we've decided to find who we want to sell to, why should they choose you? And literally just make a list. Why would someone, that ideal fit client, why would they choose you? And normally people start thinking in terms of, we sell these services, or, that really high level consideration of what we do well. It's about what you do better than anyone else in a way that is valuable for them. There's a whole range of processes that we can use to do this, but the key is once you're clear on what that value is, we've got to live it, right? Like our staff, our team, who we hire, the processes, how we all dress, present ourselves, everything just needs to speak so consistently so people, it feels comfortable to them. It doesn't feel like it's marketing trickery. This isn't, trickery at all. This is just the embodiment of what we do in our culture and our experience. Everything is about living that value proposition. So it's not just get them in the front door and then they leave because it hasn't been a consistent process. That's the sticky part. They love it. They hang around for all the right reasons. They're the ideal fit client. They refer other ideal fit clients, and that's that scalability piece.
I love that. It makes perfect sense, mate. And I think this is the thing. All of our prospects are thinking these things. They've got, okay, why should I choose this company, or why should I choose this person, or how do they compare? And if we can answer those objections before they even come up, then we're going to maximize the likelihood that they're going to go ahead. So it makes
sense. And you've touched on a really good point there. What I say to people is, as people are moving through that buying process, our goal with our messaging and our value proposition is to be just one step ahead. Where if you can help someone define their problem, perhaps even clearer than that they understood it themselves, they automatically credit you with having the solution, right? So if our content keeps demonstrating, how to help people answer their questions, then they feel very comfortable with you. As long as we don't start to tip the scale, and if I move across here, we sort of think like a seesaw, our marketing can either help or it can harass. And typically this is where people often get it wrong, is they feel that their marketing's job is to just close the sale in that first touch point. Where if we're always helping, always helpful, by the time the work of our value proposition, our content marketing, our lead nurturing, by the time it's done its job effectively, the sales process doesn't even feel like a sales process, because we've conditioned people to feel like we are just here to help. And the sale is very much helping as well. We're just bringing them into our world and then delivering on the value proposition.
Perfect. Awesome. So now this comes to executing. So we've spoken about the lead gen. So how do we do that differently now that we've got the aim and the create piece sorted?
Yeah, great question. So really now, and we sort of skipped ahead by mapping the content strategy and lead generation ahead of time. The job of our content is to position our content resources at each stage of that buying process map, but using it as a mechanism to trade content, so trading value for someone's contact details. And if we boil it down, any form of marketing that you do is a value exchange. If it's time for money or information for money, really what we're doing with our content is we're trading contact details. So literally, and everyone's, I think, well and truly now conditioned to the fact that if I download an ebook, basically what happens is someone's going to start emailing you. So if we make sure it's a really clear value exchange, the job then of the content is to pull people through their buying process, each one of those stages. And we want to make sure now that we set up, and this is what goes back to our targets and budgets. If we know how much we've got to spend, then we can make really careful decisions around the placement of that content. Are we amplifying this on social media? Do we use marketing automation software to then be able to automate that process so that if someone's exhibiting interest in consideration content, we don't keep sending them awareness stage content. We're then moving them forward into decision. So it's about choosing the right content format. And again, what we've got to be clear on is the way in which our buyer persona learns. People will naturally assume, we've got to go to trade shows and events. What if your buyer persona is just too busy and they don't like trade shows? They don't like the idea of traveling, or the networking piece isn't comfortable for them. So we're missing a huge opportunity. Maybe they love podcasts. Maybe they're visual learners. Maybe they really like, attending webinars more so than downloading white papers. So we make sure it's the right content type and the right content format, and that we're answering the right questions and positioning them in a way that is going to meet every one of those triggers that the buyer personas have through that process. So the content gets really niched down in terms of format, type, the questions and thoughts, and then how we amplify or how we use technology to enable our efforts.
It's about giving that value in exchange for that information. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think it should sit well with business owners, because ultimately, the sooner we can get those people into our world consuming our value, the more likely it is that they're going to become a client later on down the track, right?
Absolutely. And, I probably set the wrong expectation around demonizing SEO. I love SEO, and all the work I've done with my clients over the journey has been using organic content as a way to drive future clients. And we still find now content and blog posts we wrote in 2017, 2018, we're getting, a lead a day or somewhere pretty close to that from a blog post that we wrote 4 or 5 years ago. We spent equivalent of time and money, a few $100s to write a piece of content. But what we're doing is we're making sure we keep people in our own sandbox. They can learn from everything that we've written. We've provided genuinely helpful content, but it's resonated. So that same time and effort to write some content, maybe you've had someone help with some SEO, but we've only been out by 10 or 15% in terms of what we otherwise would have done. But the remaining 10 or 15% makes all the difference in the language, the keywords, the structure of this stuff, how we position it. Again, if we don't know who the buyer persona is and what stage of the buying journey we want to position each resource, then we've just missed an enormous opportunity. So the lead generation component to that really is just about understanding some best practices in terms of, the landing page design, what content we use, how we make sure we've got that value exchange, and how we progressively build an understanding of the buyer persona as they move through that buying process. So the lead generation is not just about generating an initial lead very early on in their buying process. It's as much the lead nurturing piece. So how do we warm them up to a point where they've reached that sales qualified lead stage that we set at that second module, which is, making sure we've got that trigger event.
Makes sense. Great. Once we've got that, there's a couple of other aspects of execute. So there's obviously some things I think many businesses say, I've just got to generate the leads and everything's fine. So what's next?
Yeah, the next piece is making sure we've got a framework for people to hang around. And the biggest trap a lot of businesses fall into is they just feel that everything that we already have will always be here. It's that safety blanket of people love us and, they're always going to hang around. What we need to do, it's almost like we build a castle, we need a moat. We need to make sure there's, a sort of golden set of handcuffs that we've got, which we call the exit barriers, reasons why they won't leave. Not in an autocratic, exits, penalties, whilst there's a time and place for those things, we just want to make sure it's ultra sticky, that we've embedded ourselves so deeply into what we do in their world. We build relationships, we set up some of those exit barriers, but fundamentally it's how do we keep providing continual value? It's not just about satisfying an obligation in that first hit. That customer lifetime value piece is so crucial. Like we can't ever grow if we've just got a revolving door. As you said before, that cost of customer acquisition, that's $1,000, $1,200, and all we're doing is in financial terms paying back that cost of customer acquisition because they've only hung around for 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. We've missed an enormous opportunity to grow. So before we then, sort of get busy in trying to generate new leads and doing more content, we've got to make sure, again, we've got the foundations in place so we can execute the right. So that, again, for that good fit buyer persona, we make sure that they hang around for the long term.
This is something we've spent a lot of time on, James, and you're right. There's so many businesses that don't focus on this. And at the end of the day, it really doesn't cost you much to retain your existing clients. And there's nothing more expensive than a new client, because not only do you have the acquisition costs associated with your marketing, but it's also costly to get a new client set up, because that's where a lot of the work needs to be done.
Yeah.
So I think this is so important.
Research shows it's as much as 25 times more expensive to get a new customer than to retain the ones that we have. And it's an easy trap to fall into because we just think we need more in the front end. We'll deal with the other things later, but we want to set the foundation, like building a house. We don't want to come back later and then try and fix a foundational issue with the home once the roof's already on and carpet's laid and, furniture's in. Let's just spend the time up front to make sure we set these things and we keep investing to building them. So by the time we've got this all in play, really the remaining question is, and this is where we started the discussion, it's resourcing and implementation. So the question is, do we do this completely ourselves, 100% internally? Do we outsource specialized functions, SEO, video production? Maybe we get some content writers. What does that all look like? And the danger of doing that stuff first is we end up falling into the trap of having the wrong people in our world. And, I keep using flight analogies, but what I say is you're the pilot. You don't outsource flying the plane. You know what? You might outsource catering. You might outsource flight crew. You might outsource all these other functions. But if you give over the keys to the plane, you're giving someone an opportunity to crash the thing. And if you don't know all of these components, you don't know what we're aiming for, what the targets are. You don't know when to reach out at an optimum time to be able to convert on the leads that we've spent a lot of time and money to be able to bring in. We don't know all of the fears, frustrations, needs, wants, and objectives of that buyer persona. We don't know how they make buying decisions. We don't really know the true value that we're delivering back into the marketplace. If we haven't got clear on all of these things, then as I say, you don't really have a compass. Easy to get pulled off track when you don't have a compass. And you think of someone that's out in the snow and they're hiking. If you had a compass, you look at the footprints, it's a straight line to where we want to go. Where if you don't, you're zigzagging, you're all over the place. You're just wasting time and energy and money, like effort. All of these resources that you need to stay alive are just being wasted. So before we decide the who, we need to be really, really clear on all the things we want. So then it's about getting experts in their space. Expert engineers, expert flight crew, hostesses. All of those components are purposely filled roles, but we stay in control of the plane.
Makes sense, mate. So let's reverse the hearse a little bit here, James, because I think we haven't scared the people enough to realize that this is critical.
Yep.
Because I just see so many business owners making a mistake, and this information is out there. Like, none of this is new, but I think there's many people that are chasing shiny objects. So, mate, in your experience, maybe working with a client in the past, what's been an example of somebody who's really stuffed it up prior to working with you, and I guess how you had to go about fixing it?
Yeah, great question. So it typically tends to fall into one of two camps. They try and do it themselves, and because the business owner doesn't necessarily have a depth of marketing experience and they hire the wrong team members, they're just wasting too many opportunities and they're wasting time. The thing with marketing is it's about, as we said, building that future value. So they come in and they do a whole range of activities, which is just, busy, which is, it masks a lot of problems when we feel like we're making progress. And all we end up doing is missing enormous opportunities to get this right. So I had a client that I worked pretty heavily with pre-COVID around setting these important foundations in place. Everyone else in their industry, and she'd been running the business for 6 or 7 years, and just, the way we framed it, she's spinning her wheels. She's not really moving ahead. She's surviving. Things are stable. Profitability was serviceable. They had some high turnover of sort of internal team members, but, recruiting wasn't as much of an issue. It was just okay. And we sat down and spent probably about 4 months in setting all of these foundations in place. We then, resourced a really strong team, 3 people internally, a couple of outsourced functions. Through COVID, where the vast majority of people in their space, so it was an education service provider, a lot of people in that space then either, sold the business, closed down, or scaled down dramatically. She banked 12 months worth of cash flow. So they're in the position now where they're scaling, because they invested that time up front to set the foundations, were really clear about the value they provided. As things changed in COVID and people's emotions and fears and concerns changed, they already knew how to do the buyer persona research. They knew how to demonstrate their core competency. They could pivot pretty quickly. They had the foundations to know, how do we resource this? Right, we need someone to give us a tech setup to do this virtually. They were able to move quickly because they had a compass. They knew what they were doing and where they were going. The other side of the fence for people that have always tried to do it internally are those that just try and outsource the entire function. And sometimes that's more painful. And, I typically work with people when they come to me with their battle scars of being really, really hurt and concerned and really cautious and scared about trying to do marketing again. I say, look, often you can live off the inertia of the marketing you may have done in the past. But when you get so scared that you stop, it's like being in a car and you turn the engine off as you're going up the hill. You might feel like you're still slowly going, then you'll stop, but then you start heading backwards. And if you've outsourced things to an agency and it hasn't worked, people naturally feel quite bitten, because we're talking multiple 6 figures in a lot of cases by the time all told, advertisement expenses, retainer fees of these agencies. And unless you've got these foundations, each one of these individual 9 components that you yourself as a business owner are aware of, then you're going to keep outsourcing the wrong things or choosing the wrong support partners. And you're never really going to know with that same sort of clarity as you would with that foundation in place. And typically, it does take us a little while to turn some of these businesses around. As much as anything, it's about giving them the confidence to invest in marketing, which is the reason why we start with those targets and budgets, is just making sure that there's not that temptation. And I say to people, you don't have to do everything yourself. You just need to know enough so that you're outsourcing the right functions. So you can still be the pilot, you can still choose, what you want to do yourself. But, for a lot of businesses, I say I just take them through each of those foundations to guide them, normally somewhere between 3 to 4 hours a week, to then invest in each one of these areas so that you've got a really clear set of structures so that you then, resource the right team.
Perfect, mate. That sounds great. Mate, let's land this plane. We spoke about looking at that buyer persona. So what's the minimum viable we can do there to make sure that people have the ability to speak to that ideal avatar?
There's as I said, a pretty extensive research piece that we need to go through in the buyer persona development piece is understanding who do we want to choose as our ideal fit client. And really the objective with all of this is knowing who do we want to choose. The research component that we end up doing as we move our way through this process will help us really tighten up how they make buying decisions, the questions that they typically ask. The key with all of this is understanding, as I said, who do we want to choose? And we're going to do a number of different research efforts to really help us, nail this down. But as a starting sort of framework, what I get businesses to do is look at their ideal client base, not only just in sales figures, but in a lot of other components, and then use these 4 components as a lens to then make a determination of who are we then going to do the research against. So it's called the Persona Pickers 4 Ps. And really what we mean by this is, does this component of our target audience have the capacity financially for us then to be able to reach all of our growth objectives? So are they willing to spend what it takes to then really work with us at the optimum level? Is there enough of this niche actually out there in the marketplace? Are we not going too narrow to a point where we're going to tap this out and it's not going to allow us an opportunity to scale? Have we got the capacity really to then keep working with the clients that are approving quantity in terms of their capacity to hang around for the long term, not just trying to extract value and leave? So that's the first P. Have we got the financial ability to really grow with this segment? The next is promise. And this comes back to that value proposition component. Can we look that person in the eye and say to them, I'm going to deliver the outcomes that you need in the way that's going to allow you to grow? So if it is in a marketing context, can I say to someone with absolute confidence, if you come and work with us and go through this program, that I'm going to give you the clarity and the structure and the mechanisms you need to then be able to get scalable growth in your business? So often, sometimes we can think and omit this one component, and I think a lot of good businesses, they never do this because, they've obviously got good values and integrity. But, we want to make sure that we're living that value proposition and we're staying in the wheelhouse of the things that we do extremely well, not just chasing maybe some new opportunities or flashy objects. The next piece is passion. And every great story that we hear of the companies that do extremely well out in their market is they're dealing with people that they love to work with. Everyone internally in the business, they're delighted to work with these clients. We don't have some of those cultural issues we get from dealing with often really bad fit clients that pay late or that they're really abrasive with customer service staff. You're never really going to be able to grow if you're not working with people that the whole company loves to be able to serve and work with. So that's the passion piece. Then next is purpose. And again, it feeds off our value proposition component. Is this person using the products and services where we're living in our wheelhouse? We're leveraging our core competencies and all the things that we do extremely well to add value back into the market. And this is that stonemason component. We're going to equip the business with the right tools, the right training, the right capabilities so that we can keep being experts in that space, not feeling that temptation to go and offer other services because maybe it's profitable to do that, or maybe that there's something that we can do well, but all of a sudden we've decided we can paint fences as well as build them and mow the lawns. And just because we can doesn't mean we should. So it's about having that discipline to say, we're going to niche down, we're going to deliver our purpose profitably to this audience. And once we've looked through this lens at our entire client base or maybe markets that we want to enter, and we've then defined those sort of high level components, then we start that research effort around what are those needs and wants and fears and frustrations, and unpack all of those learnings that allows us to be really quite targeted with the marketing efforts. So again, that's not the complete research piece, but it's a great starting point before we think of considering everyone. If they don't meet each of those 4 Ps, then really they shouldn't be the audience for us.
Mate, I love that, mate. I think this is really great. I think this is about having a holistic view at marketing, because I think if you're just chasing profits, you can sometimes head down a very dark path that may not necessarily allow you to build the business that you really want. And marketing's exactly that. It's about using it as a vehicle that allows you to build your dream business, attracting the clients that you love working with, the ones that are happy to pay your bill, the ones that you can deliver as much value as you possibly can to. And it's about getting this perfect mix of those ideal clients that makes business enjoyable in the first place.
Yeah,
So,
spot on.
James, this has been immensely valuable, and we've covered quite a lot of content, mate. So if you had to summarize the kind of top 3 actions that somebody listening or watching this needs to take next, what would the next best moves for them to take would be?
Yeah, so I'd encourage everyone, and I've got some resources on my website which we can guide people to, if that's of interest to the audience, where they can self-guide through that path. Really, it's about doing a traffic light audit on that marketing compass model to understand where are we already strong and where are those gaps. Because if you tend to find, and normally it's starting from the top and we work their way across each of those 9 modules, the earlier you've got issues, the harder it is to get everything else to be able to stack up. So really, and I think often the starting place for a lot of businesses comes back to that buyer persona research, where a lot of people now might find we've got our ideal fit client avatar, but it was normally formed just through, an hour's worth of filling in an online questionnaire or some anecdotal insights, and they treat that as the reliable insights about that audience. So I'd absolutely start with the buyer persona research, and whether it's our process or someone else's, just make sure it's really methodical and it gives you a research-led, persona that you can use to guide all your marketing efforts. So I'd absolutely start there. The value proposition piece, it often gets interpreted as just an academic concept, because it's typically, what we might have learned at uni or we've heard about it. And it just feels very dull. It's not very inspiring in the way that it's typically explained. But it's the mechanism for demand generation. If we want our messaging to cut through, we're going to get really, really clear on the benefits that we provide. Value is just an equation. It's benefits minus costs. So we don't want to always pull the cost lever. We want to enhance the benefits lever. So it's really, really clear in unpacking what your value proposition is, and then being able to expand upon how do we actually live it in our business. I'm not sure how we're going at the time, but I've got a model we can bring up, or I've got some resources we can point people to. But the value proposition piece is really, really important. Then when you've got those 2 components in play, really, I'd have a look at the rest of the elements in the model, because it may be you're falling down on content strategy and you're just not sure what content to use at what stage. Or maybe it's the client retention piece. But I think as we go through a self-guided path and seeing really what's holding you back, it's just about correcting some of those deficiencies, because as I said, it doesn't take a lot of time above what you're already doing. It's about having the patience to willing to sort of go slow to go fast. Get these things in place, so then everything you're doing gives you compound growth in your efforts.
Amazing, mate. This is, what we'll do is we'll direct the listeners and the watchers to the resources in the show notes, so they can get access to all of those great things, mate. Look, you've really made this super simple, and you're right. This is a clear compass, because I think if people have a clear North Star of what they're chasing, they've got a way of following a proven pathway to get the results they want, then they can get predictable outcomes in their marketing. And I think it's as simple as that. And this is definitely a science, not an art. And I think that the industry has been tarred by many cowboys and cowgirls out there that have probably done the wrong thing. And obviously you've got a really great process here, mate. So if anybody's listened today or watched today and they want to find out more information about how they might be able to work with you, James, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
Yeah, great. So we'll put into the show notes a link to a marketing game plan session. So anyone that, feels like this is an area they need to really, nail, then we can brainstorm what some of those challenges are. We've got resources to help people self-guide where they're at. But if you want to jump on the phone with me, we'll speak through some of the current obstacles that are holding you back and what the best next steps are. Happy to jump on the phone for 15 minutes for anyone in your community, and we'll really unpack what their game plan needs to look like. And then if they'd like some help, we've got a Marketing Compass Accelerator with a range of guided resources, training, and then coaching and support over the course of a 6-month period to really help people calibrate that compass. So that's probably a great first step, is we can have a talk through what that looks like. Then the next piece, if anyone feels like we just need to better diagnose where we're at, I've got an online marketing workshop which has a self-guided audit of each of the 9 components in the Marketing Compass model. And we do a little bit of a deep dive into the buying process map and some content strategies. So if it's something that you want to start to do yourself and perhaps is not quite urgent enough to jump on a game plan call, but you want to start the self-guiding, jump on one of the marketing workshops that we have, and it'll give you heaps of resources so you can get started.
Amazing, mate. Been immensely valuable. We'll include all those links below. James, I really appreciate you making the time today. And guys, this just goes to show, like if you're in the boat where you've had a bad experience around marketing in the past, it's likely because you've been too tactical and implementing the wrong things at the wrong time, or you haven't been working with the right people to get you the results that you want. This is not about foregoing marketing completely. This is about getting the right strategy that's going to support you. So hopefully this podcast has given you a platform to have a more methodical and systemized approach to your marketing to get more of what you want. James, I appreciate you making the time, mate. It's been a pleasure chatting with you today, and look forward to catching up again soon.
Absolutely, Jackson. Thanks very much for your time.
Guys, another episode of the Enjoy the Journey podcast, and make sure that you drop us a like and a follow, and looking forward to catching you next time.